Yeah, not clipping.
Not clipping like the LA Clippers. All right, testing sound, testing sound.
Testing sound, testing sound. Whoa, whoa, whoa.
All right, we are good to go. It is episode 173.
Yeah, I actually knew that this time.
Oh
Woohoo.
yeah, shit.
Yes, it's on.
You keeping track?
I had some time. Good evening and welcome to CanHammer, your stop for warmer 40K from the Great White North. Today's show is episode 173. It's our weekly podcast. This show's specific topic is going to be a little bit about the ETC
Oh
and
yeah.
the big news that just dropped and kind of,
Oh yeah.
I would say it shook the Warhammer community by storm in Europe anyway. And if LVO wouldn't have been happening when all this went down, I think it would have been a lot bigger deal.
That was the funny thing because it was like right in the middle of LVO, and then all of a sudden it was like, oh yeah, we split, and it was just like, okay, and then so half the conversation became that, and half the conversation stuck to LVO. Is quite funny.
Yeah, a lot of efforts were made a couple days after that, like recently, to spread the proper information and people to post. Like I didn't make an official post on the Canadian team until I believe like Monday, and it was kind of, or maybe it was Sunday night, but anyway, it was like, you got to process these things and get to the bottom of some of the issues. So we'll save that for the end. So how you been, man? You play any games this weekend?
Good. Before we continue, I just want to shout out to C Farsight, who is on the Twitch chat right now. He is literally the first person to post every single stream. So good on you, C Farsight. Yeah, I have been. I haven't actually played that much because the last month has been ETC practice for CanHammer team, and I'm not playing a CanHammer team. So when people have wanted to, I've matched people up. And actually, some of the games have been teams that are going to be playing each other in the first round because they've grudged.
Ooh.
So tomorrow night's game, for example, no, Thursday's game is going to be two teams that have matched up. So these are serious scouting matches. So it's been pretty cool. It's been pretty cool.
That's always neat. Yeah. Did you watch all the LVO stuff on the weekend?
It was a pretty action-packed weekend family-wise, so I didn't get to watch much. But I will go back. I tend to go back and watch and fast forward the matches that I want to see. So,
Ooh, like, is there any that stand out for you?
I want to see the final. Just because. Apparently, I'm not sure if John Lennon was on the stream. I want to see him play the Ridge Runners. Yeah. Apparently, I was hearing throughout. I was obviously on all the chats that the games that were streamed in some circumstances, people couldn't understand why those games were being streamed. Like it was like at Adepticon last year when they didn't stream the finals, the 40K finals, right? But GW has their own agenda, and so. But I heard that the 40K Stat Center stream was amazing, so shout out to those guys.
Yeah.
And I think Peter was still on his way home like Tuesday afternoon.
Yeah. Well,
It takes them forever. So
yeah. Well, on him, man. It was a good on him. It was a good few streams. I caught a couple things here or there, but definitely interesting place for the game. And I think that was evident at LVO is the fact that, we're not going to harp on it, but the Marines definitely made up something like 30% of the field, and they placed 60 or 70% in the upper tables, which is, I think, was expected. A few of the lists were pretty interesting, and a lot of Forge World. So in recent, I wouldn't say that recent, but prior to this Marine book coming out, Forge World was kind of on the decline. It was not very common, but this LVO was definitely a lot of Forge World in the top, from my perspective anyway.
Chaplain
Maybe,
Dreads, Leviathan Dreads. Yep.
yeah, that like, and there are lists that you can build, so you could build that exact list with the Chaplain and Leviathan Dreads without using Forge World in the new book, and it does the same job. It's just not as effective. So
Not as good. Yeah, not as good. Yeah. So I didn't hear of any Chappy Dreads getting pulled.
I didn't hear about that either. I was curious. It came up. I'm sure it was kept on the DL, but
Maybe if somebody's heard of Chaplain Dreads being pulled, do let us know. Maybe the Falcon has stats on how many Chappy Dreads end up being pulled, and we'll hear about it. other than BCP completely crapping it out all weekend, which is a little bit disconcerting 2 weeks before CanHammer team, but the tournament was like 8 times our size. That was a little bit disappointing. But other than that, it seemed to run as smooth as one can hope when your whole scoring system just stops working for hours at a time. But yeah, otherwise it was the other interesting thing was that Bro Hammer from Florida, all those guys, they brought the exact same list, all of them, apparently as to prove a point to GW that it's kind of like a thing. Look at us. We all brought the same list, and one of us won, and everyone else plays very well. You should do something about this. Apparently, it was an altruistic thing that they did, bringing all the same list.
Sure. So maybe that was part of the fun of it. If I was in that, let's say I was in that group, I'd be like, let's do this, like, bullshitting it. But I think GW knew about it. It's just it takes companies time to react, and I'm not defending them.
But do you think that they're not unhappy that enjoyable about this? For me. Do you think they're unhappy about this?
Well, that they can't really sell Chaplain Dreads. They've been sold out for quite some time.
No, but do you think they're unhappy just in general about Marines being so dominant?
So I don't know when you say. So this is the issue that I have with all this drama, and it's the same thing that came out of the AOS scene, because I also follow some of the AOS scene and drama. Well, who's they? Like, are you talking? Is it the CEO of GW when they say GW's happy about this? Is it the rules testers, the game designers? Like, I bet you 2/3 of that company only runs on sale numbers. Like, if you work in accounting and sales and janitorial and and you paint models, you really only care about the company's sales because, quite frankly, that's your job, right?
Yeah.
That's what so the people that actually care about game balance is probably a very small department, and maybe some of the upper management and management. But how busy are they? Like, if you release a document, like I release a lot of documents. Sometimes you're doing all the research, you're playtesting something, you're discussing it, and then they send it to publication. It's like months later, and they're coming, and then you hear the criticism. It could be like some of those guys could have been off Marines for 6 months now, some of the dev team, right? And then they're like hearing all this criticism, and they're like, wow, we didn't even think about that. And they could be too busy working on another project that they could say, okay, well, we know that this is broken, we'll fit it into our workload. But most companies, people are busy 2 to 3 weeks in advance. Like, if you're working a project-based industry, so yeah, they'll fit it in. But
I think something weird's going on. Something's going to come soon, because it's been unlike them to be so long on FAQs, and there's not been an FAQ for chapter approved yet. And there were at least one, but probably two really glaring just copy and paste errors that people have just chosen to ignore. So 55-point neophyte hybrids for GSC, obviously an error, and I don't think I've heard anybody playing it that way, but it is there in the book. And the Bulgrin Ogrin thing is thought to be a copy paste error. They switched one for the other, and so one wonders why hasn't that been fixed? It's been November, December, almost 2 and a bit months. That should have been like an errata should have come out already for that. Right.
I don't know. Maybe the guy that writes the erratas is on sick leave or vacation. I don't like. So I deal with this. Is like my job is this, not for a gaming company, but I do this all the time, and it's like I get the same feedback. Why isn't this fixed? We put in the criticism 2 months ago, and it's like, well, the resource was assigned. They're busy for 2-3 months. It could be as simple as that. It could be somebody got sick, long-term illness, and the department's down a person. Could be somebody quit. It could be that they're preparing 9th edition and they have all their resources allocated towards 9th edition, and they don't want to. They basically are like, well, it's not worth our financial investment, when the fact that the game is like killing it right now. Like, it's selling.
Yeah. So it's interesting.
So I do understand. I'm not trying to defend them, but I'm just kind of, I think I'm more sympathetic because of the fact that I work in a project-based publishing style environment, and I understand that like this stuff happens. It does suck though, but yeah, I'd love these FAQs to come out and fix it, but maybe they don't know what to do. Maybe the playtesters aren't out yet. Maybe there's no consensus amongst the playtesters. Who knows?
Well,
Maybe they're pissed off at the playtesters because a shit ton of leaks have been coming out lately. So that's got to be really worrying for them because everything was super tight-lipped for the longest time, and now everything's getting leaked pretty early.
yeah, I do know, having talked to some people, I'll just say that the playtesting rigorousness is not quite what one would expect. So,
Yeah, like I'm not like I would be a terrible playtester. Like I would not play 100 games in a month to get that book tested. I'm not saying they have to do that, but like how much of the playtester's input, and I'm not blaming, I'm sure there's some really awesome ones and I'm sure there's some really bad ones, but how much of it is theory and things of that nature, not necessarily true playtesting, and how much is people being like, well, I like this army, I want it to work, right? And they're not removing their bias.
yeah, yeah.
So what have you heard specifically about playtesting?
Well, I don't want to talk about rumors and things, but
Yeah, talk about rumors and things. Come
well,
on, this is a rumor
basically
show.
what I heard was that there are groups and factions within the playtesters, right? Because they're split by region and split by country, and playtesters pick the next playtesters or sub playtesters. So there's kind of like more senior playtesters, then there's like sub playtesters. There's these 2 or 3 layers of playtesters, and that they're not all appointed by GW. The initial guys were appointed by GW, but then the playtesters pick other playtesters. So then you end up in this little cliquey sort of groups of playtesters, right? And then so while one group may say this is strong, or the other group may say this is not strong, that doesn't ever seem to get reconciled amongst the playtester group as a whole. It just kind of just goes back to GW and something happens. And so somebody on the Twitch chat brought up Jeff Robinson. So Jeff Robinson joined the playtest team pretty late, and he was well known to have then saw the Marines stuff and said this shit is bent, right? But that just got ignored. And then because he was like the sub playtester or somebody else appointed, it wasn't like part of the quote unquote original group, and then it got ignored. And so anyway, so that's what I was told about the whole playtesting thing. It's all to say is that it may not be as rigorous a process as one would think or hope, but it is some process. But it's not. It probably has some effect on what comes out, but it's probably not as one would hope that it would catch all of the brokenness. Because from time to time we get broken shit, right? And sometimes you can't, unless you play 200 games, you can't, you just don't know. But
So, and the other problem I think with this game is the data sheets. I know it's a template, are very pretty. Everything's laid out very well, very crystal clear. It's actually very well edited, these books. I know there's always mistakes, but everything has mistakes in it. But so I look at their books, the Codex books, and I go, this is polished. This thing is ready to go to printing so far in advance that the playtesters would need to be done their playtesting months and months and months before that book came out in order for their feedback to actually really matter.
So I was told by playtesters they have 14 months. So the playtester I was talking to knows what's coming out 14 months from
exactly. That's what I'm saying, right? But they don't know what the missions are. Like they don't like the meta changes in that time, right? So what they may be testing might be, I guess, appropriate at that time. I don't know.
Yeah. No, it's hard to know.
I'm just speculating.
Right? Like
I'm speculating.
It's hard to playtest something that's going to come out in November, in January, right? Like so much changes about the game, and unless you playtest all the things coming up all at the same time with all the other things coming up, you don't know how these things are going to interact with each other, and they're being released sequentially, not all at the same time. So it's really hard. So the meta is going to be doing whatever it's doing, almost independent of what comes out. Like whatever comes out is what comes out, and then it just happens.
And if you play ITC, certain units like the Leviathan Dreadnought, don't get me wrong, is good in ETC. It's good in Rulebook Warhammer. But it's even better in ITC because of the fact that it's kill more. You have a model that essentially takes 2 full turns for a lot of armies to completely wipe out of an entire army. So that unit is just even better in this format. Whereas if you're testing it in a different scenario, it maybe not be as effective. But it's pretty cool. It's pretty interesting. like hearing the speculation about this. And I hold meetings with 5 to 50 people, and when there's four of you in a room or five of you, it's very hard to get a consensus and actually know. Like nobody agrees on what's probably been. So if they have 200 playtesters, let's say, they're all going to be saying different things, right?
Yeah, yep, and that's the problem. So whose job is it to reconcile that, right? Well, it's probably GW's job, but as you say, that stuff might already be printed, right? So
Right, collecting feedback and isolating, um, like who said what, and then people have their personal biases, and maybe they trust certain players that they maybe shouldn't, but because those players write it more articulate, or they're more punctual, or they're perceived as smarter, they might be listened to more. Like that's just common human
yeah.
stuff, right?
So we were asked on Twitch on the stream to talk about rumors of ninth. What rumors of ninth have you heard, Chris?
Nothing. I just know it's coming. I've
Yeah.
just heard it's coming. I'm sure people know. I'm sure playtesters know. I just don't. I haven't been informed.
I was told June.
Yeah. That's
Once
generally when it comes
the
out.
next whatever four more Psychic Awakening books come out, that should cover all the factions because they're going up to 4 factions per book. So the I don't even know if it's a rumor. I was pretty much told, but as I said, they know 14 months out. So June, and that the current set of books is not going to go back to index like when 8th dropped. All they're doing is rationalizing the game and apparently condensing the game. Smaller, maybe even I heard actually smaller tables, and making less models, less points, smaller game. That's what I
I like
heard.
it.
But you're going to continue to use your current, Psychic Awakening and Codexes, the same data sheets. Like it's not going back to index. And so the legending and the getting rid of indexes, all that stuff is all just leading up to a big cleanup leading into the whatever next edition or whatever you want to call it. I don't think they've ever officially called it 8th edition. I think that was us who called it 8th edition. I think it's just called Dark Millennium to them. But
It's a moot point, but yeah, I see this as a very AOS 2.0 update. There might be maybe the Cycling Awakening stuff in the future just comes in the, like how AOS came out, the new books had additional items. Instead of having 1 page of items, they all had 8 pages of items or 6. And so I could definitely see maybe some of the formatting, like the formations and things like that. Any new books that come out after the new edition drops, I could see those being included in the books as something they just add to armies, which would be interesting. But yeah, overall, I'm kind of excited. For me, a June release of 9th edition is always a big headache for me because of the ETC.
yeah.
And we'll get to that drama in a minute, but it's always just an inconvenient timing. If it was in September or something like that, it'd be a lot better for me personally, but the world doesn't revolve around me. So
yeah, I've only been around 1 edition change, and that's like a couple of months before CCBB. And so CCBB is a bit of a Wild West free-for-all with kind of index stuff, which is kind of fun in its own right. But yeah, it's always there's no good time to change, but yeah.
well, yeah, and like when I was a little bit younger, single, no kids, book would come out, and I would like buy an army and paint it in 2 weeks, and I have like most of my armies were done in like a couple weeks, and it was like switching books to get the new hotness. But now I just can't afford that. So if the new edition comes, and I mean afford it time wise, so if the new edition comes, it just takes me a lot longer nowadays to kind of jump on that train. But so
Yeah,
that's why it kind of worries me.
by June, it will have been basically every faction has an up-to-date book or up-to-date rules as of 6 or 7 months, right? Because PA just started coming out in November. So that would be the best, like a decent time to do it, as opposed to last, like if you have books that haven't had an update book in like a year or whatever, then.
Well, they have to because they want to get rid of index, and this edition changed 40K significantly. So anyway, you got some rumors about custodies, don't you?
No, not anything substantial. Just from the same sources that our book will be was delayed. So it's like Nexus, Tau, GSC, and Guard, which is pretty cool, by the way. How they put Guard and GSC in the same release, that's kind of cool. And then we may be after that or it may be the Double Knight book first, and then I think Custodians with Space Wolves and possibly Orcs. So yeah. In terms of what we're getting, I don't know. I've just been told, and I quote, "We're getting lots of fun stuff, but no substantial changes to how the army works," which is probably what one would expect. But so we'll see. We'll see.
Cool. So do you want to plug the sponsors?
Oh yeah, so big shout out to Dan and Dylan at Red Dragon, and CanHammer team is coming up in 8 days. 7 days, 8 days, and so they're getting everything ready, and that should be cool. We got Hoyt at Thunder Games and Gifts, who just sent me a bunch of books that I'm going to be giving away next week, so there you go. And David Tistamines, Martin over at Dyson Decks, the Dream Tea guys, and all our supporters here on Twitch and Patreon, and special shout out to the Custodies group, because they're just cooler than everybody else.
That doesn't sound right. That sounds wrong. Orcs is the best, man. So actually, I wanted to take a second to salute. Orcs made it.
But
to the top of LVO.
I knew one orc would make it, right? Like, you're an example of someone who's just been playing orcs and has been beating a lot of Marines. Like, you've won almost every P&P since Marines came out, right?
No, that's not true.
You can tech for it, right? And so, and it's still like that. It's still hard for them to go through so many bodies.
Well, not really. I think, from what I understand, is against Marines, your boys just die in 2 turns, which is my also this is what I saw at LVO, but this is also how I feel, because I didn't hear anything at LVO that shocked me, to be honest, with regards to orcs anyway. But yeah, so you lose all your boys, and then it's hiding grot units and shooting shock attack guns into stuff. You definitely didn't see a lot of mech guns at LVO, and I understand why. It makes perfect sense. Kill more. So you replace the mech boys with things like tank bustas and things of that nature that you can hide, and then you can possibly deny a killer or kill more a couple turns, and you'll basically win on objectives and maybe secondaries, which is pretty cool. Lots of custom force fields, which I found very shocking, because I generally only use KFF for my mech guns, because I just found that clumping the boys to get that 5-up save wasn't always worth it. Especially on the, if you look at the LVO tables, they were very well covered, but I guess people enjoy that. I just find that because I was spoiled with the old little guy that was on the index to go to the big one for the big, it's like over 100 points depending on how you kit him out. It's not fantastic. So that was kind of interesting, but yeah. I was pumped to see an orc player up there just because I think it proves that the book is there. I believe, there's not a lot of orc players. There's quite a few at LVO, but there's not a lot of competitive orc players as there is, just because the barrier to entry on the army is quite steep. And
went to Iron Hands.
Well, and that's the thing. And most players went to Marines of some kind. Lots of Iron Hands for sure at the. So I kind of question that. I'd like to see if maybe more Raven Guard. You see more Raven Guard at things like ETC style events, and then more, I guess, Iron Hands just because of the survivability and the denial. But yeah, that survivability and denial also works in other formats as well. So,
well, if you take our lists from CanHammer Team as a small microcosm of ETC format as it stands right now, there's about half and half Raven Guard and Iron Hands. It's not heavily swung towards one or the other. There's not much of the other factions, but it's mostly Raven Guard and Iron Hands in the team format, where you can only take one Marine. So,
yeah, it's
I'll have to
definitely
get Peter to do some stats on our lists.
Well, it's definitely when you switch to the team format, you're going to have way less Marines than in like a singles format, just because there's a lot of players that can't duplicate on a team. I'm sure there's lots of teams that had 3 Marine players on them, and they had to switch them up. So a lot of the Xenos lists that maybe feel right now like they're hurting, I think are definitely a lot better when you get into the team format, which is cool. But overall, I'm not surprised at all that Iron Hands essentially won it. I was surprised. I was expecting to see your Seer Council zipping around the top tables a little bit more, just because of the fact that the terrain looked very Like you could hide a lot. But I was talking to Tim about that, and he was saying that they just don't kill the Marines, so they
Yeah.
can't get through those matchups.
No, so Chris, who's the person's list I've been playing, Chris Blackham, who's done pretty well most of the season. I think he's fifth or sixth in the ITC. He didn't go into LVO thinking he was gonna end up in the top 8. Like, there's just there's the lethality of the game is way too high now versus the survivability. And that 10-man Seer Council is pretty survivable and is fully buffed, and even they can't survive. So it's just the difference in killing and survivability right now is massive. Is massive.
Yeah, we should give a shout out. Jim won a ridiculous amount of awards.
Yeah.
He got Best Thousand Suns. He got Renaissance or Hobby Tracks or Hobby Track.
First in the Hobby Track. Yep.
Yep, and he got second in the ITC. So that's pretty good. And then the ex-Canadian player TJ did really well as well. He got a couple best in factions, and I believe he got Renaissance or something like that, second Renaissance for the LVO itself.
Yep.
So congrats to those two. The rest of the guys did okay. Spoiler alert, on our last show, we had Nick on. Did not do so well for Nick. I felt pretty terrible for him, actually. I was rooting for him to get his 4-2, but
yeah.
LVO is, I think a lot of people underestimate how many competitive and serious players, as a percentage-wise, go to that event. So there's a lot of hard armies.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I guess, do you want to move into some ETC? You call it drama, but I don't really call it drama.
I don't think I called it drama. Somebody else called it drama, and I just copied them.
Yeah,
so it's a little bit dramatic because it just seemed to come out of nowhere, and unless you were in the inner circle of ETC, you probably didn't know that such a thing was happening. I mean, I was chatting to Tom just last week about rulings for a CanHammer team, and there was no indication that anything was going to happen. So yeah. Tell us about it, Chris.
Well, I'm going to give full disclosure. I am not a member of any organization. I am not involved in any of that stuff. I'm just a captain. So this is from a captain of Canada's perspective.
And you've
right?
been the captain, though, for a while.
Kinda, yeah. But we've always been, I just don't want I don't want to give the impression that we, if we say something that maybe is a little bit off right now, it's my perspective. And it's things that, every team. So what happened is the 40K split from the ETC. So every team.
So people don't understand that.
Yeah, that's what I want to get into. But
they don't understand that ETC and 40K is actually different.
Yeah, okay. So we'll get into that a little bit. But I just want to specify first that. So every team had their own reasons within that 40K organization, maybe for voting to leave. So if what I say doesn't line up with what your team or the team that represents you says is why they left or why we're leaving, it's pretty obvious, right? Because we all voted different things.
Yeah.
So basically, the ETC was set up, or I believe it started out 15 years ago as a fantasy tournament. That was mostly between some European countries. I think it was Warhammer Fantasy. I want to say 7th edition at the time. And it was between some European countries and a few British countries. Now, a lot of people find it weird that there's so many British teams. But, when this was starting out, well, they are, if you're British or Canadian, you kind of understand that they are different countries, just because that's kind of how we were taught in school as well. But and also at the time they needed more teams, right? But moot point, doesn't really matter. So the ETC was formed. It's an organization, and they essentially, I don't know the super details way back when, but they became kind of like the Olympics that happens every year, except, but pretty much exactly like that, in that a country bids. So we'll start off with how an ETC goes to a place per year. So right before the ETC, somewhere around June or July, there's usually a vote for the next ETC's location. And so these groups, and we call them orgas, is kind of the short form for them. So it kind of throws people off as instead of organizations, or they call them orgas, which is the short. So that these guys bid on the ETC, and then if they win the bid, which is all done by votes for captains from every different system. So if there's a Canadian AOS team, a Canadian Flames of War team, a Canadian 40K team, we would get 3 votes towards that essentially. And we don't have to coordinate or anything. And so when an Orga wins a bid, from what I understand, they get basically full control. They do pretty much everything except for the rules for each event. So they get the venue, they set the ticket price. I believe the ticket price might be negotiated a little bit or set by the main ATC governing body, which there is. There's also a president and like a chair and a vice chair and whatever. And then each game has their own kind of chair, but that represent the ETC organization. But then there's like the Orga that is running the event. And so they get the venue. They make money off the event. So if I don't know how the structure is, there's some kind of negotiation. So I believe a lot of it's like beer sales. A lot of that profit goes to the Orga. But a lot of them either have to rent terrain or they print terrain or they buy terrain. Sometimes they borrow terrain. And it's and then when that unit is done, so we went to Serbia. When that was done, it's essentially done. There's nothing left.
So what happened to all that terrain?
So it depends.
Keep it locally, I guess.
There's many ways. So the 40K chairs, Tom and Isaac, were basically the 1 year when it was in was it Spain or whatever, and last year I believe they made some of the terrain, and then it was auctioned off at the end of it to various teams or sold to kind of recoup the costs. I believe that was Spain. I can't remember exactly, but
the terrain doesn't belong to anybody. It doesn't travel around from year to year.
That's what I'm getting to. So there are some things that are well, it's good. You have to keep me on track, man, because I go all over the place.
Yeah.
So there are some things that are owned by the ETC, like those green painted boards, I believe were owned by the ETC that were this year. And then some of the terrain is, some isn't. But if an Orga wants to have terrain brought in, so if Serbia says, hey, we want your terrain, which is whatever they have, which is not much apparently, shipped down, they have to pay the transport cost and the storage cost and things of that nature. So there's no real continuity. So it's an issue. So from what I gathered this year, Luxembourg did not want to use their terrain resource. They wanted to do some borrowing shenanigans, and there's a lot of risk associated with that. And a lot of the other teams were getting frustrated. I was getting frustrated as well. I did vote not to leave. Full disclosure, the Canadians voted, the vote's public, but we voted not to leave, which doesn't mean anything because we totally support the initiative to leave. But a lot of it was like last year we wanted to buy mats, let's say. Every team chips in so many euros and we can buy mats for every table. Well, the Orga doesn't want that, or how do we store them? How do we transport them? Okay. We can't guarantee that they get used next year, right? So that's why, in my opinion, a lot of the terrain is kind of crappy.
Okay, let me stop you for a second there. So basically, to summarize, there's an umbrella organization with a chairman that's called ETC.
Yeah.
And then underneath that umbrella, there's committees or whatever you want to call them for each game. So there's 40K, there's AOS, there's whatever bolt action, whatever games.
Flames of War.
Whatever games hold an ETC tournament. ETC standing for European Team Championship, by the way.
Yep.
And then within each game, you have a bunch of captains. And you have the Orga, which is basically the TO, the organizing committee of that location, of which the ETC will happen the next year.
Yeah.
And really, other than this inherent structure, there's no... The ETC doesn't actually own anything.
Well, it owns some stuff, but it doesn't own a lot. So, like, when we run CanHammer Team, if we make $1,000, let's say, in ticket prices, we can invest that in our terrain because it's our terrain. It's the event's terrain. It goes next year. You know what I'm saying?
We don't make $1,000, by the way.
I was just throwing out a number. We actually, we try our best to break even. But anyway, so these ETCs, if they make money, I believe that money goes to the people that run it, right? Because it's kind of like a job for them, right? Incentive to run it. You have to pay people when it's that big and things of that nature. I don't think that's that controversial.
So this vote was about 40K as a game.
So I want to get to that. Yeah.
Separating from the umbrella of ETC.
Yeah. So if you look at it like a company, you have the ETC, chair and all that stuff, which would be like the CEO. And then usually you have like things like directorates. So the 40K would be its own directorate with a leader, and then there'd be like AOS, Flame. They would all have their own kind of structure that way, and then all the captains are essentially in charge of their game. So the way that the ETC charter is written is that captains can vote for anything, essentially. So when people think ETC pack of rules, they think of this the whole company, but actually the ETC 40K pack is written by the captains within that branch. So our branch of the 40K kind of tree voted to leave.
So it is like Brexit,
Yes,
but for
it would be.
40K from the ETC.
Yeah, I would hate to say Brexit because that's political
Yeah.
and it doesn't really appropriate. So yeah, so we voted to, and I say we even though I voted no because I support it now that it's over. That's how we democracy works, by the way, people. And so we separated. As 40K, we had a vote. What started this? This wasn't really that sudden. There was large posts. It was apparently very, or we thought as a group, it was made pretty obvious the concerns of the 40K group. A lot of it was that we make up something like 40% of the players of the event, but yet it feels like with the other events, they get a lot of the same say, right? So games like Ninth Age and things of that nature that actually hurt 40K, right? We have Ninth Age there. We lose a lot of sponsorship because like GW would never sponsor. I'm not saying they're going to sponsor us now, but they would never sponsor an event with Ninth Age in it, right? Flames of War numbers are dropping. Ninth Age has its own issues, and that's another thing that bothered me personally is the Ninth Age armies. A lot of them look like dog shit, and they're kind of affiliated with this hobby, right? And then the tables were always a point of contention. So we voted to split. We didn't intend, like I never thought it was going to happen this year. I thought for sure we'd be going to Luxembourg. Shows what I know, but we voted, and yeah, that ETC organization left. So when everybody goes and says, is ETC going to allow Forge World now that they split, the 40K split? Well, that decision was made by the same people that are leaving.
Yeah.
So when you're talking, so before the podcast, you mentioned to me, oh, CanHammer team, I don't know what we're going to do next year with the pack. Well, the people that write the ETC pack are all within that ETC Orga, right? That group.
So probably won't change very much.
So it won't change, right? Because it's all the same captains. It's all the same.
It just won't be called ETC anymore. It sounds like maybe the actual ETC now is trying to run its own little 40K thing, but the ETC that what it used to be known as will now be called something else.
Yeah, so we're looking at, we don't have an official name yet because it still is a democracy. Yeah, it still is a democracy. We still have to vote on it. It's looking like it's going to be something along the line of like tabletop world championship, 40K world championship, something along that line, world championship. For the first year, it's going to be 40K only because we're leaving to separate from the other games. But I believe they want to leave the door open for that. It's looking like it's going to be some kind of not-for-profit kind of company. The intent is that right now we keep the same governing body, which would be Tom, Isaac, and Neil. And they would be kind of like the leaders of our new corporation, if you want to call it that. And then the captains would essentially be like a board of directors where they could vote and control kind of how the organization works from there.
So will it possibly leave Europe?
No,
at least for a year. Like, will it be in the States 1 year or Asia?
That just doesn't work logistically for different reasons. That's more for like the team accessibility, right, and travel. It doesn't make sense to put it in North America because you'd be asking way more people to travel.
Will the Americans be allowed 2 teams?
I doubt it. I think so. So that's my perspective right now. It's going to stay exactly the same for this year, for sure.
It's the same people who voted on all the other stuff is just the same people, just outside of the umbrella of the ETC.
Well, as far as the 40K guys were concerned,
it's the same, basically.
Yeah,
we no more Forge World still, all the usual stuff, basically.
We didn't give a shit about the rest. Like, it's not in a bad way. Like, we wish them well, and we cared about the success of the ETC, but the chair really had like the chair of the ETC really had nothing to do with us. It was somebody that almost was seen as holding the organization back, right?
Hmm.
Um, so from the 40K like perspective, it's like we have nothing really lost by leaving.
Yeah.
Especially because the ETC, when you're trying to make the brand bigger and more world scale as well, like the ETC does hold you back being in that name and being affiliated with all those old games and that old history, right?
Yeah. So just because there's so many people asking about it, so the Forge World vote, Two Teams for America, all those kind of things that go to vote, it's the same people who voted for those things, so no Forge World, etc., who are the same group of people who just left. So those decisions are unlikely to change.
I can't see
FYI.
why they would.
Yeah,
Yeah,
because it's the same people. So
the same structure, same organization. Yeah, one country, one team. We definitely model ourselves off the FIFA model as opposed to something like the Olympic model when it comes to designating countries. For this year, I believe it's staying the same with the 4 passports per country minimum. So, like, I believe when they were going up to 6, that was like a head ETC kind of decision because it was in the charter. But I don't know if that's off the table or on the table, or if I don't think we're going to change much this year. But it's going to be almost identical in every way. So there was, when the split happened, there was some hurt feelings, which is fine because that's always going to happen. I say fine because I guess I have no heart, but the actual ETC did sever communication immediately with the 40K kind of leaders.
like this.
There was, I'm going to say this, there was some accusations about this being a for-profit endeavor for some people over terrain. And I will assure people that
No.
that's not the case. So you and I know from experience that even if you did make money off the terrain sale and manufacturing, it's not enough to really.
You spend it back on maintenance. Yeah.
Yeah. So
And freaking plastic boxes.
so I wouldn't really believe that. Like I don't get the impression that there's too many personal agendas hidden in this. The vote went through. 90% of teams voted to leave the ETC. 70% of 40K teams voted to leave this year. 100% of eligible voting 40K teams voted. And so what I mean by eligible 40K teams is you might, let's say there's, I believe, I don't want to misspeak in case I piss them off, but Slovakia has a team and a captain, but they haven't been to an ETC in 2 years.
Yeah.
So they don't get to vote. They get to be on the council, but they don't actually get a vote. Whereas Canada, because we went there last year, we get to vote. If we didn't go this year, we would still get to vote until we don't go for 2 years.
So the teams that didn't vote to leave, what are they doing?
They're going with it, as far as I know.
So they're still coming along, though.
Well, we're one of them. So 90% voted to leave out of 34,
right.
and we're one of them. So
Okay. And so,
now,
sorry, carry on.
I was just going to say, if you want to know why we voted no, we didn't. So we chose as a team to vote no to leaving this year. The only reason why that was because we understand the frustration of the rest of the teams. We just didn't want to change this close to Luxembourg. I thought it was too late, so we wanted to stay this year. And we actually abstained from the vote to leave after Luxembourg because we wanted to maybe have a revote or have a vote after the actual event if it went as poorly as it was suspected it was going to go.
So why now? Why did it happen like right now at this particular point?
So
midway through the cycle. Was there a thing that triggered it? Was it like what?
Yeah,
why
so
now?
it started off. There was some drama between the Luxembourg organization and the 40K organization. There was worries about terrain. There was worries about referees being paid, having referees. There was lots of concerns. They were not being addressed, and they were being brushed off. I'm not saying everybody did that on the other side, but that was the perspective of me personally.
So it was like leave now before we go any further, basically.
So when I talked to the guys that lead us and hosted the vote, I believe nobody expected it to go this hard.
Unanimously,
Oh, almost
not
unanimously. Yeah,
like
it was not.
Trump impeachment.
Well, I don't want to speak politics, but yes. So we basically like it was a shock to, I think, maybe not some of the European teams that are closer, but it was a shock to a lot of people that this actually went so strong. And yeah, so it's basically continued frustration, and then eventually a vote just came out, right? Because we voted on lots of things, and a vote came out, and yeah, it came back. So it wasn't anything to screw Luxembourg. Were they? Is it all their fault? No, it's not Luxembourg's fault 100%. Did they contribute a little bit? Yes. Did they maybe the last straw on the camel's back? Yes. Um, and so because we split, the ETC severed communication immediately. I already said that, but and then the ETC is running a 6-man 40K event to replace us, but there's no country restriction. So you can just bring a team and enlist. So it should get, I would assume it gets really large turnout because of that.
Maybe, but you're not going to get people going over because it's for their country. You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah,
it's a
so
long
you're
way
gonna
to
lose.
go. Like, you think the Aussies are going to go all the way from Australia to go play if it's not a national thing? It's probably not. It loses a bit of its flavor, right?
Well,
As a national kind of Olympics sort of thing.
I don't want to speak for the Aussies, but I'm sure they couldn't get. So if you think about it, they would need 9 to go to the real ETC, aka 40K World Championships, and then they would at the same weekend need an additional 6, let's say, to go to this ETC. Um, I said that backwards, but anyway, it doesn't matter. You know what I mean? So
Yeah.
that would be 14 players. I think it'd be pretty hard, maybe not impossible, but I don't know if there's 14 hyper competitive Australian players that would want to do both.
Yeah.
I think could Canada do it? Maybe, but I think it would be we have a hard enough time getting our main team like with a few spares. So getting a 6-player team to go over to Luxembourg just to play that would be tough as well, especially when they could just go to Tennessee in July and play there.
Play ETC, yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
So the other thing, the other question is, so it sounds like this new World Championship will be the same, like the timing. Obviously, the location won't be the same, but timing is planning to be the same, or like what's the deal? You guys know yet, or too
Yeah,
early?
yeah. So we don't know yet. We're planning to, as part of the vote, there was a vote on which countries we would like to go to, if not Luxembourg. France did win the vote, but and Prague did well as well in the vote. The issue is, I believe, I don't know for sure, but I believe Prague is sold out and unable to secure a large enough venue. I've heard a rumor that, so I don't want to say details in case they're private, but there is a venue that is blocked off as an emergency backup, so it will happen that same weekend. But they're looking at, so because of the split, there's actually a lot of bids coming in right now for countries to go to.
But on the same weekend.
Yeah. So, we kind of had an unofficial vote of like, where'd you rather go? But now there's a lot of maybe other groups that are saying, hey, we can host it here, or you should come to our country, or things of that nature. So,
So why would all these new countries come out of the woodwork? Just because it's a new opportunity to put in a bid?
yeah, well, and it might even be a long-term bid. Like, I don't know what the future's in store. Could this be something that's run in France every year, and the terrain is stored in France every year? And France is a great place for stepping off a vacation. I don't know if that's the intent. Is the intent to have maybe 4 locations? There's definitely a cost savings to being a repeat user of a venue or a known.
Yeah.
Like Croatia, Zagreb was very awesome, like an awesome venue. It was really good air conditioning. The hotels and food was very cheap, and it was a pretty good year actually. So, like, would there be an advantage to going there every year? Maybe not that place because the flights it's not like a major airline hub like, let's say, Paris would be, Charles de Gaulle, but. Yeah, so we don't really know what the future has in store. We don't even know where we're going this year. We just know it's happening.
Interesting. Well, if people have questions in the chat, then please put them while we have a captive crisping. I feel like I'm interviewing, I'm doing like a 60 minutes or something on.
Well, and I don't know all the answers by all means, but So a lot of the stuff you want more info. There's a few pages they kind of hastily created, which maybe I wish they wouldn't have. So like we have an Aquila like Facebook page, but it's going to be turned into the 40K Championship. We do have a Facebook page that's kind of started for the World 40K Championships, and I believe it's up to 600 or 700 likes in like 2 days. So we are encouraging our community to kind of go there. If you want information from us, I released an official statement, but it was very
Nothing
plain,
new.
very simple.
Yeah.
I did that on purpose, right? Because my goal with that statement was to say, look, we're splitting. Don't believe a lot of the BS. There was a recent, we're just splitting. It's just going to happen, and it's for the better. We wish the ETC well, and I feel like the ETC will continue to function as a group. It's just it even for me, the thing that excites me the most about leaving is we're now playing in the World Championships. We're not playing in the European Team Championships.
Yeah, that was always kind of a weird thing, but traditionally that's what it's called. It could always rebrand, but if
We tried to rebrand. It didn't really.
yeah, like again, so that's like a bunch of people want the higher ups to rebrand, right? Like, so there's not that route of communication, but it certainly gives it a little bit more of a thing. Although I guess most competitive players were aware of what the ETC actually represented. But yeah, that kind of more fitting now. You got Australia, you got North American teams, like you got all these European teams.
Might be a Japanese team, and there might be a Greater China team. We don't
Yeah,
know yet, but
yeah,
that's a rumor. Argentina's gone 2 years in a row, so it's definitely very global.
that's cool.
Yeah, because you got to think about it. You got Russia, you got the northern hemisphere to the southern hemisphere, right? Almost every continent except for Africa has teams that go.
Yeah, yeah. No, it's certainly really cool. And yeah, so I guess it probably, as long as you guys can get the first one up and running, I think it would make the most sense if you kept it in the same place or a rotation of two to three places. But
Well,
I
there's
can
also
understand that everybody wants to host it.
Well, there's also issues with tax law and corporation that weren't getting sorted with the ETC, and that's a big deal with. So if you're transporting a U-Haul rental truck full of ETC terrain and you're leaving the EU or you're entering the EU, there's a good chance you're going to have to pay tariffs or something, or I don't know the word for it, some kind of fee, possibly searching, and then you're going in to do a business, right? So think about it that way. If you and I were to go run a tournament in the States and we showed up with a truck at the border, we would have to have some paperwork, right? And possibly pay some taxes.
Yeah, never even occurred to me that that might be a thing.
So that was another issue, right? So if you're storing all this terrain in a place like Paris, well, now you're kind of stuck to the EU. Now, if you're storing it all in a place like Serbia, you could definitely move it along non-EU kind of countries in that area, right? But then there's downsides to that, and there's plus sides to being in Europe. So there's a lot of factors involved there. There's also some countries that maybe aren't the EU is an ideal place for them, and they're more comfortable in maybe Serbia because of nationalities and things of that nature. So there's definitely that. Like I'm more comfortable in the EU just because of it's easy for me to travel there because I'm an EU citizen. So it's like, you know what I mean? Skip the lines.
So, Land Pearson, I don't know if you know him. He says it's good to hear your voice again, even though you were just here last week. But he says,
Yeah.
can you see it moving out of Europe? I guess we kind of talked about that. It's just logistically, it's in the middle for everybody.
Yeah, well you have to remember there's 34 teams and like how many are not in Europe? Like if you count Russia as part of Europe, it's like 3 of us or 4 of us that aren't in Europe.
Yeah, yeah.
Well, and like, I understand that some of the, you know, in the Balkans area, they're not technically in Europe, but they're in the continent
They're
of Europe.
close enough, yeah.
Yeah.
Flying distance wise.
Yeah. And so if you were to put it in USA, as we said, you're now asking hundreds and hundreds of players to spend more money than potentially they can afford. And one of the things that actually came up a lot about Luxembourg winning the bid was that it's expensive. So it's even expensive for Canadians in Luxembourg.
Well, it's called Luxembourg for a reason.
Yeah. So that's not the reason for us, but because Anyway, but if you look at like certain other countries, like, the cost for what they're receiving or what they're accustomed to is just too ridiculous at that point.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that's
Okay.
another consideration. That's why a lot of people are like, "Why is the UTC in Eastern Europe a lot of the time?" Well, it's
Cheaper.
just more accessible. And of course, let's face it, a lot of competitive Warhammer players, that it's just like, there's a reason we have the time to do this, because we're choosing to prioritize it over maybe more hours at work. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. Yeah.
Like, I'm sure you could make a lot more money and work a lot more hours if you didn't do this hobby.
Well, maybe. Or just
Like,
sleep
I might
more.
be able, yeah, or sleep. You get what I'm getting at, right? I'm
Yeah,
not,
no, for sure, for
I don't
sure.
want to put anybody down or anything, but it's definitely like my own situation. Like, I've made decisions so that I could play this game, right? It is
Yeah.
what it is.
So do you think what's your just general gut about this year's ETC? Is it going to happen? Is it going to be just like it was? Is it going to be different in
Oh
some
yeah.
way? Like what do you think is going to happen?
So I think it's going to happen. I think to a casual observer and from a team member of my team, let's say, that goes back, I think it'll be a little bit quieter, a little bit smaller. It'll be probably similar terrain. Like, I don't think there's enough time and enough money to upgrade the terrain right away and to buy fat mats, or not fat mats, but mats this year. So I would expect it to be very similar to last year, but there'd be noticeable improvements. And I think the 40K group would maybe have more of a say in what's going on logistically. There's always been logistical issues with these events because of their size and because of some of the other games. They don't have the same emphasis on aesthetic as like GW branded games have. So there is that issue. But I think, yeah, if you're going this year, it'll be the same. 100%. Like, there'll be almost no difference, I believe, for me and my team as last year. But that being said, I'm not the one buying the venue, running around doing bids, right? Like, as part of this leave, like, there's no additional work theoretically for me, just because I'm not involved in that aspect of it, right?
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
not feasible anyway if I want it to be, because I live a continent away.
Yeah. So if people out there wondering, ETC is still on. It's just not called ETC anymore.
Yeah, it'd be 40K World Championships or something of that
40
nature.
girl world champs. So who's going to make the logo for that?
Actually, I don't want to say. I think Abramowitz is making it right now.
Really? Nice.
Yeah, I don't know for sure. I just like saw that in the captain's chat, and maybe I'll get screamed at now for spreading bullshit and misinformation. But I believe he volunteered to, and I saw a thing where he's saying, "Oh, I'm going to do it." And so good on him, man. Anybody that wants to help out is great. Like,
Just make sure they don't put some giant eagles on it.
whatever. Who cares? But there are some sad things this year. So this year, I actually do want to talk about this, because this is the one thing that really made this hard for me.
Okay.
The split, and that's this is the first year that. So last year so it's gonna go. I have to always tell a story, but so last year I went to Serbia. We walk in, and the girl that was one of the reps of the organization goes, "You guys are the only Canadian team here. You're the only team from your country here." She's like, you have a big country, wealthy country. Why is 40K the only team from Canada? Like, why isn't there Flames of War? I know that we had Flames of War in the past, but why isn't there AOS? Why isn't there a Ninth Age Canadian team or anything of that nature? And I know there maybe was in the past, but this year there was none, right? And I said, well, it's very expensive. It's very far away. And then I came back, and actually our friends from both Quebec and Toronto area are forming an AOS team to go this year.
All right.
So, and a good friend of mine, Joe Duca.
So like Conquest guys? And
Yeah, there's a few of them.
Trois
Like
Rivières guys?
Yeah, so Alex Thibodeau's the captain.
Nice.
And I believe, like, because I was the fantasy rep for a while, and so I actually gave up the rep for that game, and Alex took it over, and he wrote some nice posts about going over to the ETC. It was always a dream of theirs, and they have like a long-term plan, and this year they're going over to kind of check it out, see how the meta is, and then prepare for the future, get more competitive. And then, of course, we'll see you guys there. there was a little bit of talk about coordinating maybe jerseys, stay in the same hotel, blah blah blah, and then it's like, oh, and we got the same dice made, like we have a joint order of dice, and then it's like the other day I was like, yo, we're leaving, guys. So you guys are going to Luxembourg, and we're going to some other country.
That kind of sucks.
So it definitely sucks, right? Because you're like, well, some of my good buddies, we won't see them,
That
and then
does
you're like,
kind of
okay,
suck.
yeah, like it's. So I was like, I have faith that the ETC will pull through this because, like, why wouldn't they? But like, let's say us pulling away is like the first nail in the coffin, which I'm not saying it is. I wish them, but let's say it is. You're basically like condemning your your countrymen to
So
like a
here's
failing event potentially, or a budget. Like let's say they go over budget and then now they need more money from all the captains. A decision by the group that I'm in affects them.
so okay. Here's my question. Why didn't you take AOS with you? Since they're basically, other than the theme and like the actual armies, pretty similar games. In fact, less emphasis on terrain. So why didn't you take AOS with you? I don't know how big AOS is at ETC, but take the GW games, stick together.
Well, one, we're not in charge of AOS. We can't take them anywhere.
But
So,
you could ask them if they wanted to join you, I guess.
well, that's up to them. Um, right? Like if, for example, if Quebec left Canada tomorrow, they couldn't just say, "Hey, Alberta, join us." Alberta would have to go through their own hoops and their own kind of internal system to leave the country. If that, like, I'm trying to draw a parallel there. So it's really up to them. Also, one of the reasons we're leaving is that we didn't like the control that the other games had on us. So if Ninth Age is dictating a lot of the policy, and like the intention was to leave and be our own entity, 40K only.
Okay.
Could AOS be added in the future? Like potentially, but that's just not on the cards for this. Like this year, we've separated. We just need to live.
Yeah.
So, and I don't think, and AOS is also a new addition to the ETC. Like a lot of people don't know that they've only. I want to say this is going to be their second year, maybe third. So they were a brand new addition because a lot of the fantasy players switched to Ninth Age.
Yeah.
Because the guys that ran the ETC for fantasy Warhammer Fantasy Battles were the guys that wrote Ninth Age.
Yeah.
So that there was a conflict there. I remember I was very upset about that conflict actually because I was pretty ticked off when they didn't adopt AOS at all and they went to Ninth Age. And yeah, people say Ninth Age great game. I'm sure they have a lot of fun. It's just it always bothered me that there was like a game where people bring Lego armies and toy dinosaurs. Like it just really bothered me. I don't know why. It shouldn't, because I'm not in charge of what other people do, and I shouldn't worry about what other people do. But for some reason, that always irked me.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. So that, to answer your question, yeah, we don't want them essentially, not from a lack of love and understanding, but from a logistical point of view. And we're not in charge of AOS, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And we don't want to create a new ETC under a different name.
Yep. No, I get that for sure. You don't want to leave the umbrella just to become the umbrella.
Yeah, and this isn't me talking. I say a lot of we's and me, but this is the 40K group of the ETC, right? Like I'm just a voting member of that. I'm not the one actually making these decisions.
And it was closed ballot, I presume.
No. Well, so it was closed ballot, and then the results were shown.
Oh, okay. What did the states vote for, to leave, or?
I actually didn't look. Like I looked through and I saw it was all yes, 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 yes. I couldn't tell you individual ones. So the only ones I remember voting no was, I believe, us, Russia, and I hope I don't. Maybe it was Slovenia. I don't know. I think it was that. We could pull it up. It's public knowledge. I just don't think it really matters.
Yeah. Oh, just
Like why does it matter what the U.S. voted? Because it doesn't even matter what I voted. Maybe I shouldn't even have said that we voted no because we're leaving. And so I personally believe, and when you're a part of a democracy, like you leave. And so if you want to draw a political reference, the friggin' Reform Party in the last federal election in Canada, Bernier lost the conservative leadership race. which to me, and I'm not a conservative, so I don't really know, he should have continued with the party because when you lose a vote, you have to accept it. That's part of being a democracy and just move on with it, right? And try again in the future. And so we voted no. We lost the vote, but we totally support our fellow captains and the ETC group, and we're behind them. And so we're going to speak as if it's us with them, right? That's just the way it is.
Yeah, I don't know. You follow politics too much these days, Chris.
Well, I don't really either.
That's
But
the
that was
ideal of politics, unfortunately, not the reality of
it's
politics.
it's not the reality, right? Like you leave, you form your own. Like what if I was like, well, I'm going to stay at the no, I'm going to go with the group
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
because
Okay.
like that's just being a sore loser, right? And I've been, you know, you don't want to be a sore loser.
So Kieran says that Preston Manning is going to run the new ETC.
Sure. Yeah, we shouldn't do political references, but we kind of did a little bit this show. Tell Kieran to stop his reboot Girlymon with the cat lady memes. Those are disgusting. So I don't know if you like the Thanksgiving, the Happy Thanksgiving from GW photo had what's the cat lady's name? The Yvrain
Ring, yeah.
was sitting on like reboot Girly Man's lap. And so there's this whole subculture of fan fiction that I didn't know existed until recently.
Like Kieran does.
But Kieran knows all about it, where it's like the cat lady's like making Girly Man breakfast and like all she's wearing is like an apron and yeah, it's just ridiculous. It's disgusting. It's not disgusting. It's kind of funny, but I'm just like, it's just like it's actually a thing, right? Like that those two are a couple.
I was about to say, Kieran, you should send me some of those, but actually don't.
Oh, you're getting them now, so just be prepared.
Well, so any more questions on the stream? I think I'm out of questions. This is a pretty interesting topic, actually. That little microcosm of 40K politics, Warhammer politics. Always interesting to talk about.
Yeah, it was, and it ended well because the chair wrote a really nice post about like he essentially wished us well, and there's no like anybody that's offended that 40K left. It's nothing personal. It's we don't agree, so we're leaving. Right now, do you have a gripe saying it's too close to Luxembourg? It's bad timing. I will acknowledge that is true. Ideally, this would have been done earlier, but timing is everything, right? It's now or never.
Well, yeah, sometimes there's not a good time for these kind of things.
Yeah, sometimes there's never a good time.
Like having a third baby.
Yeah, you don't even bring that up. Are you having a third baby?
No, I don't even have a second baby. No. Okay, cool.
Yep, and so I feel a lot better now that LVO's over too because the rankings are done. Woo! Top Orc Canada, bud.
There you go. Okay.
I know we talked about last show, but I feel really good now that it's like it's official now. I could be like, okay, it's done.
Yeah. So actually, a bunch of people were asking me if I wanted to start or maybe support the starting of an official Canadians ranking.
Yeah, me too, man. So I've got a few messages about that. The issue is there's a lot of different ideas about that. People want to do provinces. People want. I was thinking, like, it sounds like a great idea. What I was thinking was take the ITC rankings, click the Canadian button that's already existing.
Let's do that.
And let's get some kind of fund sponsored by organizations or stores where those people get a trophy. Or maybe we go to Frontlining and we ask them if they could order Best in Faction Canadian trophies.
Yeah.
We pay them for it, and then they give them to those players, right? I didn't, but then the talk turned into a whole new ranking. Like, I'm just like, I'm not interested in any of that. Yeah.
So actually, I originally thought of maybe holding some kind of invitational, like at CCBB on the Friday for the top X players, and that would be the beginning and end of the season. But it's so hard to get people because it's so expensive to fly across this freaking country that it's really hard. Like, we don't normally get a lot of people coming from outside of Ontario and Quebec, because it's such a cost So I don't think that would go anywhere. And we have such a large country with not very much in the middle. Sorry, Peter. That it's we really kind of East Coast, West Coast, right? And so
He's in the north.
I know he's in the middle and north is kind of like the armpit of the country. But
I still think you should do it. I know that Stutter Scrub does an invitational on the Friday. I'm not sure which metrics they use to do that invitational. Is it just people that they think are ETC players, or is it just good players that they like? I actually, Dustin will probably, I never asked him what the metric was, but if you want to do that, you could just, if the top guy for, I don't know, what's like Custodes can't make it, well then it'll go to the second top, right?
Yeah. I'll think about it. It's just some more work for me to do, and I'm not sure I have the time. But it's an interesting concept. I quite like it.
I'd play in it, bud. I'd play.
I actually originally thought of doing that just as an Ontario league, so Eastern Ontario and Western Ontario, and then having a invitational on the Friday of CGBB. But those players play each other anyway at CCBB, so it's not really that big a deal. But if we could get like Jim and Alex and those guys coming from out west and the Quebec guys, and then end up being like maybe more of a national sort of thing, that might be kind of cool. But I think you're right. Like what we would do is use the ITC rankings, click Canada, and we would just have our year go based around CCBB as opposed to around LVO, because that doesn't make any sense.
So what I would like to do is we could do it for this year, like CCBB maybe set like a time in June where we do the cutoff for the invitational, and we invite the top of that faction from each faction, but you have to play the faction that you got invited for.
Like that you're the top of.
Yeah, so you would go through, like, so the ITC has like best Imperial. So we'd say who's the best mixed Imperial player in the Canadian rankings. Okay, you get to come. So what is there, like 14 different rankings or something like that? So it would be a 14-player event that's invitational.
RTT, yeah.
So you'd be like, oh, who's the top Custodes guy? It's you, but you have to play Custodes or just don't come, right?
Yeah.
Or we'll go to the second highest. And that way you would have an invitational tournament with the best of their respected factions playing. You would not have any duplicate armies.
Yeah.
That'd be interesting.
The other wrinkle to remember, though, is your ITC points in Canada are for events that you play in Canada, even if you're not Canadian. And so...
Yeah, but that's fine by me. That's fine by me.
So you would be fine with having Americans show up?
Well, it's just a fun invitational. Yeah. Yeah. Why wouldn't I be fine with that?
Yeah, that would be interesting. Well, think about it.
Encourage them to cross the border.
Wouldn't be that hard to organize. It's just organizing a different Friday event than the doubles.
No. You would still do the doubles, but you would just have another tournament.
Yeah.
Right? Like, why would we stop the doubles? We'd have people playing the doubles. We'd have people playing in the invitational. And I don't know, quite frankly, you could do, like, there's nothing that stops you from calling an invitational and saying, I'm only going to invite my friends or people with big friggin' noses. I'll invite those. Like, there's, you know what I mean? You can do what you want. You're running the event.
Yeah. I'll think about it. I'm not sure if it's too late for this year, but something to think about for next year.
Never too late. It's never
never too late, ETC. But it's already halfway, and some people might have been trying to aim for that if they knew that there was such a thing. So maybe we start with CCBB as the beginning of the year, and then next year do it invitational.
No, just do it for, like, in June. Whoever's the top in their faction gets the invite to the invitational. Or July.
Okay. I'll run it by the guys.
What guys?
I'm
the guys. I'm the guy.
Intrigued. You're not even
run it by me.
You're not even in the chat, Chris.
I know, it's great. It's liberating.
Cool. Okay.
Any more questions? I guess not. So
I don't think so.
Have a good one.
All right. Good night, guys.